Jumping back into the action now here on the Chip Shot Football Podcast to continue our discussions around several things around the playoffs and going back to this past weekend to the divisional round a little bit. I think it's fair to say it's still hard to fathom how the Lions find themselves already eliminated after earning the number one seed and really not only, getting the number one seed, but getting a franchise record, 15 wins, and in my opinion, being like the most steady team throughout the entirety of the year. Because each and every week, I thought you saw it pretty early on first, and then each and every week how the Lions and the way that they're built, the way that they play, especially with those coordinators there, obviously, right? How I felt like they were really like stockpiled in really making a deep run at this. And after that game against the Rams where they won, they just continued to steamroll some teams, just overpower and just outlast the most of their opponents really throughout this year. And it is still hard to think about how they're not even playing anymore, right? And likewise with the Baltimore Ravens, I think you could say a lot of the same things, because being eliminated already the year after you made it to a conference championship and you lost in very dramatic, disappointing fashion. So you go out and get Derrick Henry, and now this year, being a lot better with having another Hall of Famer on your team, you fail to reach where you did last year, when you did get to a conference championship without him. So it does leave you a little bit perplexed as to how that even happened, right? Because it feels like they're overpowered on offense. We saw it against the Steelers multiple times. We saw it against the Texans, where the Texans offense really didn't do anything that game, and the Ravens put up like over 30 points. And they just really put an emphasis on how they wanted to play with Derrick Henry, especially towards the end of the year when you want to play that way, right? Where you want to be playing your best football. And still, the biggest thing with them is that they couldn't get out of their own way, creating turnovers for themselves and giving the ball away, basically. And not that it was solely on, like, say, Lamar's turnovers, because he did put them in a good spot to almost come back in that game, but those hold a lot of weight. So it always feels like you end the season, if you're a Baltimore Ravens fan, or especially if you're some of the players, and you think to yourself, like we just did this a year ago. Like, we were in the same spot a year ago. We did the same mistakes. We were in some of the biggest moments, and we just continue to fall short in these moments. And it has to be extremely just frustrating, obviously. And now looking at both of these teams, the Ravens and the Lions, both will obviously be kicking themselves. But because they're still so talented, because you still have a Dan Campbell or John Harbaugh, Jared Goff, Lamar, great running games, right? And receivers as well. Great offensive lines. Getting back to this spot, in order to get some sort of revenge or overcoming this hurdle seems plausible, but as most people, as I've heard around the NFL, say that in the moment, right, it does feel like, yeah, we could just get back there again after such a close loss. We'll be back. But clearly it wasn't that for the Ravens and the Lions, and you don't really know what that means until you suffer something like this, right? You just truly never know. You could be as talented, have such a star-studded roster, but each year in the NFL is so different and so unique that you just never know what the year is going to hold at all, right? There could be injuries, there could be a bunch of other different things that could happen, seedings and just upsets and things like that you can't really plan for. And how that affects the results in the postseason. And they always say that no roster in the NFL is exactly the same, and that's also playing into this question that I was, thinking about today. With both of them, just from an on-paper standpoint, right? You look at how stacked their offense is, both of them. Their defense is still very good, and the Lions are going to get some guys back. But who's most likely to struggle on their way back to trying to get back not only to this point, but also getting further, right? Finally getting over that hump. And I got a couple pros and cons here for each team before I give my thoughts on it. But Eric says, I feel like Josh is like Peyton Manning and Mahomes is like Brady. Manning always lost until the later years, right? And that kind of, Eric, that plays into the last segment and the segment that I'm talking about now, right? Each and every time that Peyton lost, it felt like it was so close that you're just going to get him back, next year. And sometimes that was what you thought was going to happen, but also you just never really knew. And he had multiple opportunities to get back at Tom, and those teams changed, and I'm sure they approached it each and every year, like how not only do we win a Super Bowl, but just how also we beat Tom Brady, right? How do we finally beat him? Because we know that Peyton was good enough. We know that Josh is good enough. It just takes a lot. It just takes a lot more than just being talented and having good players. It takes a whole, just everybody being on the same page. And, that statement, that analogy is very accurate. And, both of those guys had a lot of great battles. Josh and Patrick have had a lot of great battles, but it's been very one-sided. And I think hopefully Josh has like I said, the best opportunity to overcome that. At least get one back on Patrick this upcoming Sunday. But to relate it back to the question on the Lions and the Ravens, right? Which team has a harder path to return to this point in time in the playoffs and potentially make it further? Starting off with the Baltimore Ravens. Some of the cons, I guess you could say, is that this team is maybe as close to their ceiling as you would imagine, because there's no one position where I'm thinking like they obviously need to upgrade here. Maybe corner, because the corner opposite of Nate Wiggins or Marlon Humphrey, I forget his first name, but his last name is Stevens. A lot of the times they would be going after him, so maybe that's the only spot that I could think that they need to upgrade there. But linebacker, they're solid. Kyle Van Noy had another great year. Madubuike is still there in the middle. Their offensive line is very good. Obviously, we don't got to talk about Derek or quarterback. They had a Pro Bowl receiver in Zay Flowers. Rashad Bateman played better. Mark Andrews, despite the loss, is still a great tight end. Same thing with Isaiah Likely. So I labeled it as a con because it's hard to imagine that they fell short now, and now that they're just going to get drastically better, because I don't really think that's, kind of possible with them. So it makes you think like this could have been our best chance, right? And they couldn't take advantage of it. Also, you look at the levels of competitions, not just from the teams, but also, I'll start with the teams, right? Because you got the Chiefs, obviously, the Bills, and not just being about one or two great players. We talked about the styles of both of those teams and how very well they're built, how very intentional they are about their styles and whatnot. So you got those two teams. You got the Bengals that are going to be better. The Chargers are, they were disappointing, but they're just not some sort of slouch team, right? They're going to get better. The Broncos, same thing with their exciting rookie quarterback. I'll throw the Steelers in there. Why not? They'll probably be good, challenge you, and then just fall off at the end. The level of competition in the AFC is still very, very tough. Similarly to the Lions a little bit, you have Todd Monken interviewing for some head coaching opportunities. If he were to leave, where does that leave this offense, and how, do you go and move on from him potentially, right? Because he's been a big part of how this offense has played. And if he leaves, now you got that to kind of, deal with. And then you look at the pros of, the situation with the Ravens, and you think they always got a chance with Lamar. Simple as that. When you have one of these rare and very talented quarterbacks, they're always going to have a chance with Lamar. So you have some security there. Zay Flowers just really had his first big, impactful year, and I still think he's only going to get better. And they got a talented defense. Roquan Smith is a big part of that. And, just the organization overall with the Ravens, just some organizations really struggle to make it to this point. And I think the Ravens have really not been that. So you have the organizational stability, the familiarity there, the culture, if you will, there to know that you're capable of coming back, that this team, this organization is going to put you in a good spot to always be in contention. So those are the pros. And Eric says Bills defense will be a disadvantage. They capitalize on teams that push the ball down the field, but that's not Andy Reid's offense. And, that's another great wrinkle to what makes this matchup with Josh and Patrick so interesting, right? Because the offenses are very methodical, like I said. But if you remember to the first matchup in the regular season, it wasn't like a downfield throw, but Patrick tried to extend the play and he overthrew one of his receivers, and Taylor Rapp got an interception in that game. And although it wasn't like a deep down the field throw, it takes something like that, like overextending or overcompensating, thinking that a risk that you think is calculated might be too risky, and you make an ill-advised throw, an ill-advised decision, and things like that. And it might be the only mistake you make all game, but that's the kind of margins we're talking about, right? And that's a great point, Eric. But we'll see where these teams kind of maneuver around that, right? Kind of towing that line between Patrick doing Patrick things, Josh doing Josh things, and just taking the check down. Just check it down. We don't need you to be Superman this play. They're both capable of doing it, but that's sort of like the chess match, right? Who's gonna budge first? Who's gonna give in first to that? It is gonna be fascinating to watch. And on the line side of things, you got some of the negatives like losing Ben Johnson and now Aaron Glenn. Obviously, that's been very stable over their course of being such a dominant team. And now you bring in two new voices. It could be a situation like the Eagles this year, right, with Vic Fangio and Kellen Moore, or it could be like the Eagles a year ago with Brian Johnson and I'm forgetting their defensive coordinator's name, right? But those guys, you bring in two new coordinators, and after Shane Steichen and what's the Cardinals? Gannon. It's his last name's Gannon. Once Gannon and Shane Steichen left the Eagles, you saw how a disappointing year they had the following year. So the Lions are kind of at a risk of doing that, and they just won 15 games, so it's hard to imagine they come back and are just like undefeated or have like 16 wins, right? It's hard to imagine them playing drastically better, like we mentioned with the Ravens. The level of competition in the NFC feels like it's only getting better with the Buccaneers, with the Falcons, with the Seahawks, with the Packers still there, with the Bears now a little bit with Ben Johnson coming in, and you just got a lot of teams vying for spots, and unfortunately not everybody can make it. So these teams are only getting better and in a way kind of catching up to the Lions, right, if that makes sense. So you have that to worry about. And for the opposite side of things, though, the pros for the Lions as to, avoiding something like this is that, they do have a lot of talent, right? With Amon-Ra, Sam Laporta, Jahmyr Gibbs looks like he's ready to take another step. David Montgomery is there. You can't imagine that you're going to be any more unhealthy than you were this year, right? This year was insane. So you only just got to imagine that you're going to be healthier in the upcoming year, and you got easier quarterbacks to get through, right? No shade to any of them, but none of them are like getting past Lamar or getting past Josh or getting past Patrick. Probably two of them in a single postseason run. The NFC doesn't really have dominant quarterback play like that. So in that regard, it's a little bit easier. And in terms of who I think is going to have a tougher time, I'm going to go with the Ravens because I still find it hard for them to make a Super Bowl. I'd say the Ravens because I think it'd be harder for them to obviously get past Josh and obviously get past Patrick as the biggest reasons, right? But I think it's also going to be easier for the Lions because the injuries were ridiculous, obviously, and I don't see Jared throwing 4 turnovers or just giving the ball away 4 times because that was a huge part of it, right? Because you take away a pick six, now they only win by 7 points. You don't fumble in the red zone. Maybe you cut that down to 4. You take away another turnover, a throw into the end zone. That could be 3 points right there. And the game's a lot closer. So I think, the 4 turnovers hurt, and I just don't see Jared throwing 3 or 4 again in any sort of situation. And the quarterback play is obviously the biggest part for me. But for Baltimore, I just don't know where they could get drastically better to make a huge difference to the team we saw already, other than experience, right, and the repetition. But getting past Josh and getting past Patrick in one single playoff is going to be extremely tough. And only, the greats like Patrick have gone past Lamar and Josh in multiple postseason runs. So, and then you also throw in Joe Burrow in there as well, and you could maybe face like all 3 potentially, in a way, I'm sure. So it's very stockpiled like that, and it's extremely difficult to beat a bunch of them. So until I see them, get over their self-inflicting wounds, I can't say that they're going to have an easier time getting back than the Lions, because I think the Lions, which is a bit of an irregularity, a little bit with the turnovers and the injuries, I feel like those 2 things specifically aren't going to happen once again. So I'm going to go with the Ravens. I feel like it's going to be tougher for them to get back to this point. But we do got one more segment to talk about in regards to another discussion point just here quickly to end the show. Saquon and Jaden Daniels have been 2 of the most impactful players this season, and we're going to answer a question, right? Who is more capable based on their own skill set, their position, and the supporting team around them? Who is more capable of carrying their team to the Super Bowl on their own? Is Saquon more capable, or is Jaden Daniels more capable of doing that? We're going to answer that question when we return quickly after this.